Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, episode 87.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 87, the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/87. Today's sponsor is giftforgunnuts.com. Giftforgunnuts.com, where you can get great gift ideas for the hunter and shooting sports enthusiast on your holiday shopping list. From now until Christmas, daily updates. Head over to giftforgunnuts.com and you'll find links to great gift ideas. Of course, you can always help out the show by going to any of the show notes pages and using the Amazon shopping search bar there. That helps out the show at no additional cost to you. And we're also sponsored by Liberty Classroom, where you get the history and economics lessons they didn't teach you in high school. So head over there and also check out Liberty Maniacs. Liberty Maniacs, where they have great gifts for the libertarian and gun lovers on your holiday shopping list. T-shirts, mugs, bags, great images and accessories. Today's guest is Greg Hopkins. Greg is the author of A Time to Kill, The Myth of Christian Pacifism. And now, here's Greg.
Greg Hopkins, welcome to the show.
So, thank you so much, James. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Greg, you are the author of A Time to Kill. Would you tell us a little about that book?
Yes, the book is called A Time to Kill, The Myth of Christian Pacifism. And the reason I wrote it is I wanted primarily Christians and Jews who look to the Bible for their ethical basis in things to be able to understand that God commands us to defend the innocent with all legal force, and that he actually blesses us for defending the innocent, and does not condemn us for using even deadly force as long as we use it in a biblical manner to save the innocent, and also in a legal manner.
And what inspired you to write this?
Oh, yeah, it was my own convictions, because if we look at the Bible, James, and I say, okay, I like this idea of self-defense. I like this idea of being able to protect my family and myself. But then you think about, well, wait a minute. There's that Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And Jesus says, he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. And if I say to God, well, I really don't care about what you say, God. I'm going to do it anyway. Well, in that part of my life, at least, am I not a practical atheist? Because if God did say, if he actually does say in the Bible that we're not allowed to defend ourselves, then we have to trust to God and simply not defend ourselves or others. So what I set out to do many years ago was to let the Bible speak and see what it actually had to say on the subject. And as I studied, I found that Jesus never taught pacifism, nor does the Old Testament, nor did any of Jesus' followers in any of the biblical writings of the New Testament preach pacifism. As a matter of fact, Jesus passed up every single chance that he had to preach against using force to defend people, and he actually, in many cases, strengthened what Moses had said about defending home and family.
And I want people to go and get the book, so I don't want you to reveal too much that's in there. You answered a lot of the common common objections that people have to self-defense. You mentioned live by the sword, die by the sword. There was turn the other cheek. There was there's one that's escaping me right now. But you addressed all of those. Was there one that you struggled with trying to find an answer for more than others?
It was a matter that of several years working through it, and so it had to be systematic. And the main thing is, when we're studying the Bible, is leave our preconceptions at the door, and that's what I had to do, and see and look at things in context. Well, if we're looking at this, there's no verse that says, thou shalt defend thyself or others, or just like there's no verse that says, thou shalt abort or thou shalt not abort. So you have to look at the entire Bible. And so that's what I did. I started, after looking at those two key phrases that pacifists tend to use, turn the other cheek, live by the sword, die by the sword, I said, all right, now, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, he says, don't think I've come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill. And so we start with the law. We go back to Genesis and we start working through and we see what's God's attitude about innocent life. And we find out in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, he said, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That was God's third command to Noah off the ark. Well, that must be pretty important to God then. And so we follow on through, and we find Abram, before he's completed his covenant and becomes Abraham, his nephew Lot is kidnapped along with a whole bunch of people by raiders from somewhere around Babylon or somewhere in the land of the Mesopotamia, and he chases them down with his own 318 armed and trained men. Now, this is the father of the faithful, and he kills them and slaughters them, chases them for about 24 hours after the battle, comes back to Jerusalem and meets Melchizedek, who everybody agrees is God's representative on earth, and Melchizedek blesses him in the name of the Most High God, because, and he's literally coming back from battle with blood fresh on his hands. So you start to get an idea of the context and say, hey, there is, God actually blesses us for defending the innocent. And it goes on through. We go to Isaiah chapter 54, verse 17, where God says, I myself, and this is one of those verses that it was my third reading through the Bible that this popped out at me. It says, but it said, God says, I myself have created the smith that blows the coal and brings forth a weapon for its work. God states to Isaiah that he has given us the ability to have technology to make weapons and defend the innocent. And you see that there's a continuing theme all the way through as you study the Old Testament. As long as you study in context, that means don't take a verse out of the meaning that it has within that whole section dealing with it, and let Scripture explain Scripture. That's why I don't appeal in the book to Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or Martin Luther or anyone else. I let the Bible speak for itself, and you let Scripture explain Scripture, and where the normal sense makes good sense, don't look for any other sense. So by the time you get to Jesus, you begin to understand that there is a whole culture of defending the innocent in the Old Testament, and there's no reason why God would allow his people to be victimized and wiped out in the New Testament.
So there was a question I had when I started reading the book that I thought you might cover, and you talked about Romans, but do you have any thoughts on what Christians that are living in in parts of society that criminalize self-defense, are they bound by the law, or are they, what is there, for folks that live in Australia or Canada or even New Jersey and New York where they can't carry legally, what are they to do?
Oh, well, that's hard. But the way I come down to it is if we're wiped out, then there's no witness. I mean, if the church had not supported the defense of the Roman Empire, for instance, against barbarians, and later the defense against Islam, that there would simply be no Christianity. And so when it comes down to our actual existence, we know that if we simply submit to criminals, then we will not have an existence. So if I'm living in New York City, what I would do is I would try to use improvised weapons of some type. For instance, police-type flashlights. There are the older police flashlights, the old ones that were about 1.5 foot long, and as a matter of fact, I was using one just last night in my car, and they make a very good. They're aluminum. They have 5 or 6 batteries in them, and so it's a 2-pound lead pipe basically. I would use pepper spray. I would have a knife if it is allowed. If nothing else, you can use the old Street Fighter's trick of a couple of rolls of nickels and use those to either help your fist to keep it from getting broken and to add weight if you're going to use your fist, or you can put them in a sock and use it as a flail, a mace, if you will. And there's matter of fact, the mafia used to use bars of soap in a sock to beat people up without actually killing them, to teach them a lesson. So, but definitely what I would do if I was in New York City, there are lawyers there that their entire practice is obtaining permits for people. And I would spend the money and the time to obtain a New York City permit if that's what I had to do. Now, in the state of New Jersey, it's possibly even harder to get a permit. In some of the other states that are basically anti-gun, like Massachusetts, it's simpler to get a permit. But in any case, I don't believe that God saying we have to obey government means that we have to actually commit suicide and not defend ourselves in some way. At the very basics, if you're physically able, is learn a martial art and learn it well. And of course, as I teach a lot of people, various civic groups and so on, learn awareness so you can avoid danger as much as possible. So that's the way I would try to cope with it if I lived in a place like that.
Thank you. So you worked as a prosecutor for a while. Were there things that good-intentioned Christians did that got themselves in trouble?
Oh, that got themselves in trouble? Oh, yes. We had a convention of a particular Christian group at one time, and the police were directing traffic, and this lady, the cop was saying, okay, everybody's got to go right. And the lady said, no, I want to go left because my kid wants a soda from this convenience store down here, and the cop would not let her, and so she ended up bumping the cop with her car. Now, of course, that doesn't go along with Romans 13, that we're to obey the let every soul be subject to the higher powers, or to Peter's admonition in 1 Peter that we're supposed to obey government officials. But even in her trial, she was just adamant that, my golly, she wanted to go left, and if the cop was directing everybody else right, she didn't have to do it. That's where we have to watch and pay attention. In Christianity, a lot of it is humility, and we need to, unless the orders of government are telling us not to worship God, or telling us to do something that is completely repugnant to the Christian ethic, then we're supposed to obey. And so we need to have some humility about things. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. So you mentioned in the book a few times the importance of firearms training, but also legal training, I think a lot of people listening might have the idea that, they're the good guy, the other person's the bad guy. Why is legal training so important?
It's so important. I tell you, James, if I had a case that was actually self-defense, I would drop it. But it happens so rarely. And the vast majority of times, lawyers themselves would come in, James, and say, "Oh, this is self-defense." And I go, look, buddy, no, it's not. And here's why. Well, we'll just have to tee it up. And I won every time, and their client got convicted. See, that's the problem. Lawyers themselves, for the vast majority of them, do not know self-defense law. It's not taught in law schools. And so it's something you have to learn. Well, quite frankly, you have to be a geek like me that loves this stuff and studies it all the time to find the things. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had judges and lawyers say to me when they called me in as an expert witness or I was testifying as an expert witness, "Well, I didn't know that. It's right here in this book, Judge. I'd never heard that before." And the person's been a lawyer and a judge for 30 years. I mean, these are fine, good lawyers, but it's a specialty area. So when someone says, "Well, I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried out by 6, that's absolutely stupid, because the jury will be instructed to follow the law. And in every state, you will be held to the standard of an ordinary, reasonable, prudent person under like or similar circumstances. And everybody knows one phrase about the law: ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if your state law says, as most states do, you can't use deadly force to protect mere property, and you shoot a guy who is stealing your car out of your driveway, you're going to jail for murder. And the jury is not going to say, "Oh, well, let's give the guy a break. I mean, after all," that's a question for the insurance company and the police. You see, I've had a mother, a sister, and a wife sitting in front of me crying because the son, brother, and husband legally carried a gun for 8 years, and then he got into a fight in his mom's house helping his brother, who was having a fist fight with his ex-wife's new husband. And he pulled the gun in a situation that it never should have been pulled. The man ended up dead, and he ended up spending 20 years in prison for manslaughter. You see, you've got to know the law, otherwise you will exert too much force or even not enough force. And these things, like people think that, "Oh, I was in fear for my life." That phrase means exactly nothing in court. Because, again, the jury will evaluate your actions by the facts and how they objectively match the standards of the law. And your subjective fear means absolutely nothing at that point.
Thank you. I'm glad you shared that. I hear people say things like that all the time, and I cringe. I don't think they fully appreciate it. Obviously, it's better to be alive than dead, but I don't think people realize how long and how expensive and how difficult it is to win a self-defense case. So.
Yeah, it's true that we had a terrible tragedy about 2 months ago here in Alabama, where a man heard somebody fiddling with his car, and he had a long driveway, about 50 yards or something, and he went out with his gun and fired at the car as it turned onto the road, and he killed his 17-year-old son, who was taking the car without Dad's knowledge. He's now charged with the murder of his 17-year-old son. So you see, ignorance of the law is not only no excuse, it's terribly stupid.
Yes. So I always ask my guests if there are books that they recommend. Obviously, your book. Are there any books that influenced you and your training?
Oh, yes. I'm deeply indebted to Massad Ayoob. Massad Ayoob is my guru. I've been to his what was called the LFI 1 class back in '99. His book, In the Gravest Extreme. Everyone should read that. If you read that book, James, you will know more about self-defense than 99% of the lawyers and judges in this country. And it's a little 135-page book. His book, The Truth About Self-Protection, it's a little dated. It's from 1983, but it has insights in it that are just wonderful. His latest book, Deadly Force, is kind of the part 2 to In the Gravest Extreme. And that is a tremendous book for people to read. It goes through, for instance, analyzes the Trayvon Martin case and a whole bunch of other stuff that's really, really good. Those are a couple of books that he's one of my favorite authors. Another one is Mark McYoung, and his book In the Name of Self-Defense is I think it's a hard read. It's not something you pick up and read in a week and then say, okay, I got it. It's something you go back to a couple, 3 times and read over. He also has a new book just out in January, and I was honored to be one of the folks that previewed it and helped edit it, called What You Don't Know Can Kill You or Put You in Prison for Life. And that's with Mark McYoung and Jenna Meek. There's a lot of other authors out there that have influenced me, and they're very, very good. But Ayoob and Mark McYoung, I think, are 2 of the people that your listeners can go to and start learning real things and the way things happen on the street and how it applies to the law right away.
Thank you. And you also teach, training for churches. Would you tell us a little about maybe like what churches should look for when they're looking for a program?
Yeah. That's a great question. First of all, is you look for people, for personnel, people there who are already doing things, people who are already committed and so on to the congregation as a whole, and then people who are willing to learn, people who are self-disciplined, because this is the thing, that they need to be able to deal with things without being hot-headed and without jumping to conclusion. For instance, my own son has autism, and they need to be able to understand what the actions of a person with mental disabilities might be like versus a person who's an actual threat. So basically, you want people who are service-minded, and at the very bottom line is they will lay down their lives for others. They will stand in the gap and take the bullet if they have to. So those are the kind of people you look for. The second thing you have is get legal training with someone who is a lawyer who can actually teach you things. In Alabama here, churches have found by taking my class, they actually get their insurance rates lowered. The more practice you have, and this goes for the civilian defender individual as well as the church, the more documentable things that you have, classes, training courses, and even the books and the magazines you've read. If you can document that, then that makes you a more reasonable person under the law. You're basically like Yogi, you're smarter than the average bear, and it comes into evidence in court. And it also, again, it lowers your church insurance rates if you do that. A book I would recommend for anyone that wants to think about starting a team would be Keeping Your Church Safe by Ron Aguiar. It's a short little book, but it's got little short chapters on everything from electronic surveillance to first aid to how do you handle protesters, for instance, at your church. Ron he's the security chief for the 25,000 member Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He knows what he's talking about. I would also encourage you to take your team and go to one of the sheepdog seminars put on by Carl Chin and Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And by the way, those are influential books for me. Grossman's books on combat and on killing are I think are required books for every gun owner. And go to one of the sheepdog seminars. It's well worth your money to learn what those men have to teach as well.
Well, Greg, I thank you so much for being on the show. I'll post links to your website and your book on the show notes page. Any parting words for our listeners? There's one other part of the book that I think I've got 4 chapters on Jesus in the military, and I wrote that part of the book because we have so many people, veterans that are committing suicide, and if they understand that God blesses us if we have to kill in combat, in law enforcement, or in self-defense, that God blesses us and does not curse us, that God knows the difference between murder and necessary self-defense. So I think it would help people. King David killed a lot of people, but he only got in trouble for the one that he murdered. Okay? So I think people need to know that Jesus never told anybody to quit the military, and neither did any of his apostles. That's another thing about the book that I think can be helpful. If you know a vet that's having problems with PTSD, perhaps this book would help. If you know a person who's recruiting into the military or the police, get them this book. I think it will help them going in to get their minds right for it. Well, thank you very much for being on. Oh, go ahead.
And if you want to check out my book on a website, it's alabamaselfdefense.com. And I have my new video for people in Alabama. We just now came out with a video of my class, and the book is available there. It's also available on Amazon. Any bookstore can order it for you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I would love to. Anytime you need me, James, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 87 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/87. You'll find links to the books we talked about there, to the websites, and, of course, to our sponsors, Liberty Classroom and Liberty Maniacs. So please check those folks out, and you can always help out the show by using the Amazon search bar at any of the show notes pages. You will generate a small commission for the show and at no additional cost to yourself. And of course, giftforgunnuts.com, where you'll find holiday gift ideas for all of the hunting and shooting enthusiasts on your holiday shopping list. Out of Order, James Kalita. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.